In 2009, a research team at the University of California, San Francisco, sat down with a woman who insisted she felt completely fine on 5 hours of sleep a night. Doctors usually hear that sentence and assume the person is exhausted and just doesn't realize it. But this woman was different. She had been sleeping 5 to 6 hours a night for her entire adult life. No naps, no coffee dependency, no afternoon crashes. And when the researchers looked closer, they found her daughter slept the exact same way. That single family changed the way scientists understood human sleep forever. Because up until that point, almost everyone in the medical world agreed on one thing. Adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and anyone who claims otherwise is either lying to themselves or slowly damaging their body without noticing it. This mother and daughter broke that rule completely, and their blood held the reason why. If you're watching this, hit subscribe. Next week, I'm breaking down the twin studies that reveal how much of your personality is actually written into your genes before you're even born. This is not a story about hustle culture or productivity hacks. This is not about waking up at 4 in the morning and telling yourself that sleep is for the weak. This is about a real, measurable difference buried inside human DNA that allows a tiny fraction of people to get by on far less sleep than the rest of us, while somehow staying sharper, healthier, and more emotionally stable than people who sleep twice as long. And once you understand how rare this trait actually is, you'll never look at your own tiredness the same way again. To understand why this discovery matters, you first have to understand what sleep actually does inside the human body. Sleep is not simply your brain shutting off. It is an active, highly organized process where your brain clears out waste proteins, consolidates memories, repairs tissue, and resets your hormonal balance. During deep sleep, a cleaning system in your brain called the glymphatic system flushes out a protein called beta amyloid, the same protein linked to Alzheimer's disease when it builds up over decades. During REM sleep, your brain reorganizes emotional memories and strengthens the neural connections tied to learning. Skip enough of this process, the effects show up almost immediately. Reaction time slows, mood swings increase, immune function weakens, blood sugar regulation gets worse. This is why sleep researchers have spent decades pushing the same message. Get your 7 to 9 hours or pay for it later. So when researchers heard about a family that seemed to break every rule in the book, their first assumption was skepticism. Maybe this woman was simply used to feeling tired and didn't know what well-rested actually felt like. Maybe she napped secretly during the day and forgot to mention it. Maybe her sleep quality was so poor that her brain had just adapted to functioning on fumes. Scientists have a name for people who think they don't need much sleep but are actually silently impaired. They call it sleep state misperception, and it's extremely common. Most people who brag about only needing 5 hours are not special. They are simply used to being tired, the same way someone can get used to living with chronic pain and stop noticing it as sharply. But this family was different, and the difference showed up the moment they were tested properly. The research team brought the mother and daughter into a sleep lab and monitored them using a method called polysomnography, which tracks brain waves, eye movement, muscle activity, heart rate, and breathing throughout the entire night. They also used actigraphy, a wrist device that records movement patterns over multiple weeks in the person's normal home environment, to rule out the possibility that lab conditions were skewing the results. Night after night, the pattern held. Both women fell asleep quickly, spent a shorter amount of total time asleep than average, and woke up naturally without an alarm, fully alert, with no signs of impaired cognitive performance the next day. Their memory tests, reaction time tests, and mood assessments all came back completely normal in some cases, sharper than the control group, who slept a full 8 hours. This wasn't sleep deprivation. This was something else entirely. And because the trait ran through 2 generations of the same family, the researchers suspected they were looking at something written directly into their genetic code. They sequenced the DNA of both women and compared it against a large database of people with typical sleep patterns, searching for any mutation that showed up in the mother and daughter but not in the general population. After narrowing down thousands of genetic variants, they found it. A single mutation in a gene called BHLHE41, more commonly known by its short name, DEC2. DEC2 acts like a dimmer switch for your body's internal sleep pressure system. Under normal conditions, DEC2 helps regulate a hormone called orexin, also known as hypocretin, which is one of the main chemicals responsible for keeping you awake and alert. The mutation the researchers found caused DEC2 to lose some of its ability to suppress orexin production, meaning the women's brains were producing slightly more of the wake-promoting hormone than a typical person's brain would. In simple terms, their internal alertness signal was turned up just enough that their bodies didn't build up the same level of sleep pressure that forces the rest of us into 8 hours of downtime. To confirm this wasn't a coincidence, the researchers didn't stop at studying humans. They engineered mice with the exact same DEC2 mutation and watched what happened. The genetically altered mice slept roughly 2 hours less per day than normal mice, yet showed no measurable decline in cognitive testing, physical activity, or health markers. When the mice were deprived of sleep entirely and then allowed to recover, the mutant mice needed less recovery sleep to bounce back compared to normal mice. This was the strongest evidence yet that a single genetic change could rewire how much sleep a mammal's brain actually requires, not just how much sleep it thinks it can get away with. This discovery opened the door to one of the strangest hunts in modern genetics. If one mutation could create a natural short sleeper, there had to be others. Researchers began actively recruiting people who claimed to function well on 5 hours or less, screening out anyone who showed signs of poor sleep quality, mood disorders, or cognitive decline, and focusing only on people who matched a very specific profile. They needed to be lifelong short sleepers, not people who had simply adapted to a busy schedule. They needed multiple family members with the same pattern, suggesting a genetic root rather than a lifestyle choice. And they needed to perform at a completely normal or above average level on cognitive testing, despite their reduced sleep. Out of thousands of people who applied to participate, only a tiny handful actually met every criterion. This alone tells you something important. True natural short sleepers are not simply confident, high-energy people who train themselves to need less rest. They are a specific, rare genetic minority, and most people who insist they belong in this category are almost certainly wrong about themselves. In 2019, a decade after the DEC2 discovery, the same research group identified a second mutation, this time in a gene called ADRB1, which encodes a receptor involved in the brain's arousal and alertness circuits. The mutation was found in a father and daughter who both slept around 6 hours a night their entire lives, again with no signs of impairment. When scientists engineered mice with this mutation, the effect was just as striking. The mutant mice were more active during their waking hours and recovered from sleep deprivation faster than normal mice, reinforcing the idea that this specific brain circuit, centered around a region called the dorsal pons, plays a direct role in determining how much sleep an individual's brain actually needs. Then came a third gene, NPSR1, tied to a signaling molecule called neuropeptide S. This one was found in a family whose members slept an average of just over 4 hours a night, one of the shortest verified sleep durations ever recorded in a genetically confirmed short sleeper. Mice engineered with this mutation showed the same pattern. Shorter sleep duration, but no decline in memory, coordination, or stress resilience. If anything, some of these mice appeared to handle physical stress tests better than their unaltered littermates. By this point, the researchers had identified several separate genetic pathways, all converging on the same basic outcome. A small percentage of the human population carries mutations that alter how their brains regulate sleep pressure, arousal, and recovery, allowing them to function fully on significantly less sleep than the rest of us. And the more families they studied, the clearer the picture became. This isn't one rare glitch. It's a small but growing list of genetic variants, all pointing toward the same conclusion. For a tiny slice of humanity, 5 hours of sleep isn't a shortcut or a bad habit. It's simply how their biology is built. So how rare is this, really? Based on current research, scientists estimate that true genetic short sleepers make up somewhere less than 1% of the global population, possibly as low as a fraction of a percent once you filter out people who mistakenly believe they belong in this group. If that estimate holds, it means somewhere between a few million and a few tens of millions of people worldwide carry one of these mutations, out of a global population approaching 8 billion. To put that in perspective, you're more likely to be naturally left-handed, more likely to have red hair, and significantly more likely to be colorblind than you are to carry one of these confirmed short sleep gene variants. That rarity is part of what makes this discovery so fascinating, because it raises an obvious question. If sleeping less without consequences sounds like such a massive advantage, why didn't this trait spread through the entire species over time? Evolution tends to favor traits that offer a survival edge, and more waking hours would seem to mean more time to hunt, gather, build, and reproduce. So why are natural short sleepers still such a tiny minority after hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution? The leading theory among sleep researchers involves trade-offs. Sleep isn't just downtime. It's when your body performs an enormous amount of essential maintenance, and there may be subtle costs to running that maintenance process on a compressed schedule, costs that simply haven't been fully identified yet because these individuals are so rare and so recently studied. Some researchers suspect that natural short sleepers might experience slightly different long-term outcomes in areas that haven't been tracked over a long enough time frame, since the oldest confirmed short sleeper families have only been under scientific observation for a little over a decade. Others point out that evolution doesn't necessarily optimize for the individual. A population made up entirely of short sleepers might not actually gain an advantage if resources, safety, and social structures were built around a longer resting period for the group as a whole. In early human history, staying still and quiet during the night may have offered protection from predators and environmental dangers that active, wakeful behavior would have exposed people to instead. There's also a more mechanical explanation. These mutations appear to be extremely specific changes to complex genetic pathways. the kind of precise alteration that doesn't happen often through random mutation. It's not that evolution rejected this trait, it's that the exact genetic combination required to produce it safely without breaking other systems in the body is simply rare to begin with. Most random mutations to sleep-related genes probably cause harm rather than benefit, and only a narrow set of very specific changes end up producing this rare, best-of-both-worlds outcome. What makes the short sleeper story even more interesting is what researchers found when they looked closely at sleep architecture, meaning the internal structure of the sleep cycle itself, rather than just the total number of hours. A typical night of sleep moves through several stages: light sleep, deep slow-wave sleep, and REM sleep, cycling through these stages roughly every 90 minutes across the night. Deep slow-wave sleep is where most physical restoration happens, and REM is where a huge portion of memory processing and emotional regulation takes place. When researchers analyzed the sleep architecture of confirmed genetic short sleepers, they found something remarkable. These individuals spent a noticeably higher percentage of their total sleep time in deep, slow-wave sleep compared to average sleepers. In other words, their sleep wasn't just shorter, it was more efficient. They seemed to reach the most restorative stages of sleep faster and stay there longer, proportionally, than people who slept a full 8 hours but spent more of that time in lighter, less restorative stages. This might explain how they get away with less total rest. It's not that their bodies need less repair work done, it's that their sleep cycle is structured to get that repair work done in a shorter window. This has led some scientists to describe natural short sleepers as having a kind of built-in efficiency upgrade, similar to the difference between a slow computer that takes all night to process a task and a faster computer that completes the exact same task in a fraction of the time. The workload is the same. The processing speed is different. There's another twist to this story that has caught the attention of researchers well outside the field of sleep science. Some early data suggest that these mutations might be connected to broader resilience against stress and even certain age-related health risks. Because deep sleep is when the brain performs its most aggressive cleanup of waste proteins, including the amyloid buildup associated with cognitive decline, researchers have started asking whether efficient short sleepers might be clearing out these waste products just as effectively, or possibly more effectively, than people sleeping longer but less efficiently. This research is still in its early stages and nowhere near conclusive, but it has opened a serious new avenue of study into whether sleep efficiency, rather than sleep duration alone, might matter more for long-term brain health than previously assumed. None of this means the average person should try to train themselves into needing less sleep. This is one of the most important points sleep researchers make every single time this topic comes up in public. The genetic short sleepers in these studies were not people who forced themselves to function on 5 hours through willpower, caffeine, or discipline. Their bodies were never generating the same level of sleep pressure in the first place. For someone without these mutations, deliberately cutting sleep down to 5 or 6 hours doesn't unlock some hidden efficiency mode. It simply creates a sleep debt that keeps compounding day after day, whether or not the person feels it consciously. Studies on chronic sleep restriction in typical sleepers consistently show the same results. Reaction time slows to levels comparable to being legally intoxicated, memory consolidation suffers, emotional regulation weakens, and long-term health risks, including cardiovascular disease and metabolic dysfunction, climb significantly. The rare individuals who thrive on 5 hours are not proof that less sleep is fine for everyone. They are proof of exactly the opposite. Their biology is different, and that difference is precisely why the rest of us can't replicate their results by simply setting an earlier alarm. This is actually one of the more dangerous misunderstandings that has spread since these gene discoveries went public. Productivity influencers and high-performance coaches sometimes point to natural short sleepers as evidence that sleep needs are flexible and can be trained down through habit and discipline. Sleep scientists have pushed back hard against this interpretation. The mutation doesn't just remove the feeling of tiredness. It appears to change the underlying biological processes that determine how much repair work the brain and body require in the first place. Removing the feeling of tiredness without removing the underlying need for repair is exactly the setup that leads to long-term health problems. Because the warning signal is gone, but the damage is still accumulating in the background. This is part of why researchers have been so careful about how they study this population. Every confirmed short sleeper family included in these studies underwent extensive screening to rule out sleep disorders, thyroid conditions, and psychological factors that can sometimes cause people to underestimate how tired they actually are. Only after ruling out every alternative explanation and confirming the pattern across multiple family members and multiple nights of lab-monitored sleep did the researchers move forward with genetic sequencing. This rigorous approach is exactly why the DEC2, ADRB1, and NPSR1 discoveries have held up under scrutiny and been replicated across separate research teams, rather than being dismissed as a fluke. So where does this research go from here? Several labs are now working on understanding exactly how these mutations alter brain chemistry at a mechanical level, hoping to eventually develop treatments for the millions of people who suffer from insomnia or other sleep disorders that leave them chronically exhausted despite spending enough time in bed. If scientists can understand precisely how these mutations make sleep more efficient rather than simply shorter, there's a real possibility that future treatments could help people with legitimate sleep disorders get more restorative rest without necessarily needing to spend more hours unconscious. This is a very different goal from trying to help already healthy sleepers cut their rest time down for the sake of productivity. It's about helping people whose sleep is already broken get it working properly again. There is also ongoing research into whether combinations of these mutations or additional genes not yet discovered might explain the full range of natural short sleepers found around the world. Not every confirmed short sleeper family carries the same mutation, which strongly suggests there are more of these genetic pathways still waiting to be found. Every new family that gets identified and studied adds another piece to a much larger puzzle about how the human brain decides exactly how much rest it actually needs. What ties all of this together is a much bigger question about human biology that goes beyond sleep alone. How much of what we consider a fixed, universal human need is actually more flexible than we assumed, at least for a small percentage of the population carrying the right genetic variants? Sleep has always been treated as one of the most rigid biological requirements we have, right alongside food, water, and oxygen. The idea that a single mutation in one gene could meaningfully shift that requirement while leaving cognitive performance completely intact challenges assumptions that had gone largely unquestioned for decades. For the overwhelming majority of people watching this, none of this changes anything about your own sleep needs. If you feel tired on 5 or 6 hours, that's not a personal failure. That's your biology working exactly as intended, sending you an accurate signal that your brain and body need more time to recover. The rare individuals carrying these mutations aren't stronger or more disciplined. They're simply running on a different genetic blueprint, one that happens to be one of the rarest and most specific configurations found anywhere in the human genome so far. But the discovery itself matters because it shows just how much detail is still hidden inside human DNA, waiting to be uncovered. A trait as fundamental as how much sleep a person needs, something every single human being experiences every single day of their life, turned out to hinge on tiny, specific mutations in a small handful of genes carried by a fraction of a percent of the entire species. If something this basic could remain hidden for this long, it raises the question of what else might be sitting quietly inside our DNA, shaping how we function in ways we haven't even thought to look for yet. If you made it this far, please subscribe. Next week, I'm covering the twin studies that reveal exactly how much of your personality, from risk tolerance to emotional sensitivity, was already written into your genes before you took your first breath. That video drops soon, so stay close.